Welcome to RSA Conference 2024 in San Francisco. My name is Todd Thiemann. I'm a senior analyst with the Enterprise Strategy Group, and we're here talking about discovering and protecting sensitive data with a phenomenal, outstanding panel of CISOs. Thank you very much for joining, but let's get started with some introductions. So to kick us off, Renee Guttmann, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Renee Guttmann, and this is my 28th RSA conference.
Woo.
First time I was here, 5 vendors.
Okay.
All right, just by way of context. So I am the former CISO for Time Warner, Coca-Cola, Royal Caribbean, and Campbell's.
Fantastic. So Teza, Mukkavilli, could you give us some background on yourself?
Yeah, thank you for inviting. Not been to 28 events, but that's phenomenal to see the growth. I've been probably last 10 years I've been at RSA. I'm the CISO at ChargePoint. We are one of the largest EV charging infrastructure companies, and we collect a lot of data. That's how all the automobiles and vehicles are happening to be more digital. So this is an exciting topic for us from a security standpoint.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Teza. And Brad Schaufenbuel.
Yes.
Could you give us some background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer at Paychex. Paychex is a large provider of HR software and services, and we have a ton of sensitive data, so it's a topic near and dear to my heart.
Fantastic, fantastic. So to start with, we need to sort of fess up, we own data that we don't know we had. Your team might have some crown jewels out there, or might be a box of smelly gym socks, and you just don't know. How does DSPM or data security posture management solve for that previously unknown, or what you could call shadow data? Renee, do you want to take a shot at that?
Sure, so the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to define shadow data. And I want to say this because I think that sometimes we think about this kind of thing as bad. It's not bad. I mean, the business has a job to do, and the reality is there's a lot of cloud adoption going on, a lot of SaaS adoption. I mean, this is now a $250 billion industry.
Yep.
So it's natural that there would be data outside of that is purely managed by IT. And so that is the data that we're talking about, really, which is how do you discover what's in your Azure environment? How do you discover, what's in other cloud environments? And that's exactly what DSPM does. It's really designed to discover the data. It's designed to classify it, to tell you what kind of data it is, whether it's PII or whether it, in my case, we were actually looking at DSPM solutions to help us discover what was recipe data. So we could actually tell, what a recipe looked like. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, looking for social security numbers. For us it was, and I would also say looking for critical data, because I think that it's not just sensitive. It can be a box of smelly gym socks, but it's highly critical to the gym socks business process. Yeah. So that's exactly what DSPM does, and more importantly, it will tell you then who has access to it. It will tell you whether it's protected. I think a very good use case is when you're talking about developers, and developers are possibly, typically using some form of production data. So if they're using some form of production data, but it is sensitive, and you want to be sure that the data is encrypted or something like that, then again, DSPM will tell you, whether it's who has access to it and whether it's, again, appropriately protected.
Teza or Brad, anything you want to add or subtract?
Great points. I believe that security as a function needs to enable business, and data is a critical part of that journey. Of course, we have to enable this with a risk management view, and that is where DSPM kind of brings these two, kind of a Venn diagram, right? It brings both the risk and the data together to give you a view, like Renee was saying, who's accessing it, how is it being used, what are my critical data stores, across different compute stores, right? Whether it's AWS, Azure, on-prem data centers, anything. So that is where DSPM plays a very critical role into understanding how do we enable the monetization, usage of data, but also have the right risk controls, the guardrails in place. So that's
right.
Yeah, what I've found in a lot of organizations, they have a pretty good handle on their structured data stores. Like their relational databases, their data warehouses. It's what happens to that data once it's extracted from those centrally managed data stores, where you start to lose visibility and insights in that data. So somebody extracts the data to a CSV file and loads it up somewhere else, or they run a report and that data ends up in a big PDF file somewhere in a file share. And DSPM, one of the main goals of it is to find that data and allow you to kind of put the controls that you would normally put in that structured data store on those unstructured data stores.
You have any thoughts on where that typical shadow data comes from? Is it come from lines of business? Where does it originate?
Yeah, it may be. See, there's usually a good business reason that data is required. People aren't extracting data from these centralized data stores just for shits and giggles. They're actually, they have a business purpose for it. They're using it for another a business process, but oftentimes that may not be fully managed centrally, and you lose visibility into it.
Okay. So, Renee, a lot of this touches on the role of the CISO. There's some macro implications here. How do you think that that CISO role is going to evolve in, say, the next 5 years?
How about if we just talk about the next 2? All right, we'll go that far. So I think there's actually 3 forces at play here. All right, one is what I've already talked about, which is the cloud and SaaS development. I mean, now you have companies that are cloud native, right? I think, isn't that the term that they started, and everything that they have is in the cloud. And the second force is the SEC rule that came out, all right? Or any other regulation for that matter. And then the third, because I don't feel this answer would be complete unless I mentioned AI. So let's talk about those 3 things.
I have to do it. We're at RSA 2024.
I have to do it.
You got to talk generative AI.
And so on the first thing, because of the move to SaaS and cloud, and I was doing some checking, and there are something like 30,000 companies that are that are organizations developing SaaS apps. There's 7,000 marketing apps, okay, that are SaaS, 770 healthcare. And I think there was, when we start moving towards the cloud and SaaS, I actually think that it meant that the business could run fast, and they could run faster than IT could keep up. And on some level, when we would do things like third-party assessments and it would take us 2 weeks, I think the business got tired of us. All right, that was actually a negative trend and impact, I think, for CISOs. That we're not able, to your point, to keep up and be business enablers. So that, I think, it was a minus point for us. But what is now elevating, I believe, the CISO role again, the security role, the risk role, is the legislation, which is requiring greater transparency. What's the role of the board? How is the program being run? I've even seen, I did a comparison between annual reports from 2022 prior and 2023, and they're actually even, in some of them I found that they were even talking about the credentials of the CISO in the 2023 report. So I think that particular rule is elevating the role and giving it more visibility. And I think AI is pushing us a little bit more to governance again, which is, where is the data? So, what is the data? I mean, that's pretty much, AI is, I want to call it a data pig, but it's synonymous, which I just need data, it demands data.
You have that data feeding into that.
Right, so because of the 3 things, I think that the role will evolve. I think first I'm seeing people being elevated. And somebody said to me, well, of course the role is being elevated. Nobody wants to say their CISO's buried 4 layers down, especially if you have to write that within within the 10K. So the role's being elevated. I also see CISOs being moved into positions of CIO, CTO, maybe even CDO. I know of one CISO that has, both functions, the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Security Officer, Chief Risk Officer role. So I think the role is being elevated. And I think the only thing that will be, that will work against us if we fall back and we are not that business enabler.
Yep. 100%.
And so I will say this, I think that DSPM also has to be used properly. It's not a stick. Okay, it's not a stick to say to the business, you ran off and did something that you shouldn't have done. They have to do the business. And DSPM is actually a tool that enables us to be closer to our business, provide them with information about where the data is, how long it's been around. So I actually see DSPM as supporting the enablement of the CISO role going forward.
Can help with alignment.
It can help and make us better business partners, and maybe we'll get, if it's a promotion to be, the CIO and the CISO, maybe we'll get one of those too.
So let me transition for a moment into data lakes and sort of fishing in data lakes, if you will. How do you discover that valuable or sensitive data in large data repositories that can be black boxes? Does DSPM help you maintain that data security hygiene in those data repositories? That's the question, and let me hand that to Brad to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So, today you have your data in many different repositories, including data lakes, data lakehouses, data warehouses, and all of those tools tend to have some subset of functionality that you would use to manage that data, so manage access to it, identify or control access to that data, but they're disparate. You'd have to manage it across all of these different data stores. One of the big benefits of a DSPM platform is it allows you to uniformly apply your policies across all of these different data stores.
Okay. For Paychex, has that helped in terms of some of the compliance that you have, in terms of going in there and ensuring we are complying with whatever the compliance regime might be?
It makes it a lot easier if you're not having to essentially configure and manage and apply those policies across 36 different data store types. You can do it in one place and then have that pushed out to all of your different data repositories.
Tez, any thoughts?
The visibility is critical. When you have so many data stores and a lot of them are consumed and used on a real-time basis, where you have a lot of input data that's been morphed to serve your customers the best way. I think having that visibility through this layer is important, instead of relying on different dashboards to determine, and also not in line. You're not doing it, you're almost doing it post, you're probably doing it every week, but something like DSPM brings it really forefront, where you're in line, you can study and you can kind of like visualize it real time what's happening. So it helps bring your security analysts closer to how it's being used and consumed. And going back to the LLM topic that Renee, you were talking about, historically, like CISOs have focused on what is stored, what is shared, but now from a collection standpoint, you only looked at PII, but LLMs are data hungry. They want as much data, and it becomes your responsibility as to what do you feed to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it impacts the poisoning of it, it impacts a lot of other risks that you think of. So it's an amazing period, and DSPM helps serve that purpose. So.
Yep.
One of the trends that I've seen recently is how much more interested security officers and security teams are with the location of data. So that was something that recently for me, I'm hearing much more of. I will tell you that 3 years ago, I was in a meeting where somebody said, that is absolutely not my job, to know where the data is and whether we're in compliance to the privacy rules. But more and more, I meant to bring this up before, is the fact that a solution like DSPM will tell you, where is the data located in the world.
Data sovereignty issues.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Makes sense. And we're going to come back to that LLM topic and then sort of double click and dive deeper. Now, one challenge out there is there's some hidden risks in abandoned or duplicate data. Have you found cost savings in your experience, or potential cost savings, or is there a reduced risk footprint that comes from data security posture management? And let me, with that question, hand that to Teza. You have any insights there, any thoughts?
So those are the added benefits of something like this, and let me explain why. You collect data, and you're storing it probably in some data lake, which is now being consumed by different functions. For example, sales, marketing, different functions in your organization are now consuming it, and they tend to duplicate a lot of these. Now, I have seen instances where regulators come to us and they say, can you show me clearly what regions have you collected the data? Where have you stored it? So we could literally open this dashboard and say, okay, this is where we have the data, this is where we store PII, this is non-PII, and it helps us also, at the end of the day, say this is going to be my retention strategy around it, which helps you save costs, which helps you push some of this data that you don't need or is not used on a day-to-day basis into more of the cold storage, so that you don't have to pay a premium of storing everything live. So there's definitely an added benefit where you can study these data stores of the consumption models, how much are they duplicated, and kind of bring them into different tiers.
So is that a one and done thing, or is that an ongoing thing? You deploy initially and maybe you find some stuff and then you rationalize it, and is that it? Or are you finding things are dynamic and so it's an ongoing phenomena?
It's a massive ongoing process, and one is discovery, which is great, but then you have to sit down with your cross-functional partners and kind of like come up with this negotiation model of saying, this is how long, this is how best, because everybody has FOMO. Data is one of those, and you don't want to say you won't have data, but you have to come up with a proper guardrail with your cross-functional partner. So it's a continuous thing. I wish it was one and done.
Yeah. Yep. Brad, Renee?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things when you first run a DSPM scan discovery. In almost every organization, they find all kinds of data they had no idea that they had, and a lot of that is abandoned data. It's data that somebody extracted for some good reason, they used it, and then they just forgot to go back and delete it or clean it up somehow. And obviously that creates a risk for the business, especially if there's sensitive data elements. It's another place that it has to be protected or isn't being protected, and this helps reduce the risk. Find that, eliminate it, and get rid of, at least reduce the footprint that you're trying to protect.
I've worked in organizations where IT paid for the cost of the cloud, and it wasn't charged back to the business. So IT's budget kept growing, and the business thought, it doesn't matter, right? That this cost is out there. And so one of our use cases was actually to find out how we could at least understand the cost of the storage that we were paying. But the problem was that the people, we had been through so many mergers and divestitures that the reality was that even when we presented it to the business, they really couldn't tell us. So one of the key decision points was, when was the last time it was accessed? Does it look like it's actually still being used? And we would park it, and eventually, we were able to get rid of it. And with that in mind, the stakeholders for the project included the law department, because they were very interested in what was happening around retention policies, especially when we brought a company in and they had a tendency to keep things forever. So we had quite a number of stakeholders in addition to IT who was looking to really rationalize the costs.
Many constituents there.
Many constituents there.
Yeah. So let me ask Teza a question. Do CISOs and their teams know where all their data is, and sensitive data in particular?
That's the goal. That's
okay. But the reality, in your view,
it's a constant exercise, not only through tooling and everything else, but also understanding where your organization is heading to, because that could potentially lead to new ways of collecting data, new ways of storing sensitive data. So as a CISO, your organization is not just looking at your policies but you're kind of being those cross-functional partners where you go and try to sit on other function roadmaps and try to understand what is it. And historically, I would say we've been an office of no, so we're not invited to such cool parties, but it's changing, and I think going back to my earlier point about being business enablers, we want to be seen more as how can we enable you to do something rather than flat out saying no for any of that, and that helps with this whole sensitive data, proprietary data, or other data that are there. So massive, yeah.
So let me change gears here and talk about generative AI, and it's like the topic of the year, and it's not just a security phenomenon, it's a line of business phenomenon where it's being embraced, and there's a sea change for enterprises leveraging generative AI across the board. Generative AI apps they're relatively new, and some of the data security implications are still emerging. Mm-hmm. How do you enable a business while avoiding the misuse or abuse of valuable or sensitive data with DSPM? And let me direct that one to Brad. You have any insights there or thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. Well, the potential for generative AI is incredible, which is why businesses are adopting it as quickly as they are. Some of the risks associated with that are, if your data, if it doesn't have the right access control on it, if it's not classified correctly, it may accidentally be ingested into these large language models and then leaked to folks who really shouldn't have access to it. Yeah. So it's pretty important that that data be properly classified, the access controls are correct, so that doesn't happen. And that's, again, where a DSPM can help identify that and ensure that it's classified correctly, that the access control is set correctly, so that if it shouldn't be ingested into those models, it isn't.
Makes sense. Teza or Renee, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I called AI a data hog or be something else, but I mean, it really is desperate for data. And so what I have seen is that companies are actually acquiring data from other sources as well.
Training data.
Training data. And unbeknownst to me, I had a situation where we acquired data that was highly confidential, and the business had even signed a contract agreeing to protect it in a very, to protect it very well. And I do remember the phone call which said, "Oops, the data it wasn't protected as well as we should have protected it." And so I think people have to think about that too, is that it's not just your data. You may be buying it and you may be under some other obligation to protect it properly. And this is a way that you can actually determine whether you're complying with maybe a contract that you've already signed or that a business unit signed.
Makes sense, makes sense. So what steps should CISOs take to secure that LLM infrastructure or Copilot infrastructure, whatever they might be rolling out in terms of generative AI?
Yeah, I think I'd start with the non-technical, which means training our users on responsible usage of generative AI. I think that's the best way to start. But beyond that, I think you need to take steps to anonymize or de-identify any sensitive data that may be ingested in the large language models, so that there isn't a mistaken disclosure of that information. And then the last piece is where I go back to my original statement, which is you need to make sure that there's the right access controls and classification of all your data so that it doesn't get accidentally ingested into these models when it shouldn't be. Makes
sense. So with DSPM, there's a value rationale. This is beyond the sort of the business case that might trigger you to initially look at it, but the value that it's providing writ large. Why do you, as CISOs, why do you make DSPM a priority? Was it, there could be many different things. It could be, there's a zero trust initiative. There could be a compliance. Maybe it's HIPAA. Maybe it's SEC rule that Renee mentioned. And that's applying to CISOs and data custodians, or maybe it's risk mitigation, or maybe it's also cost savings that comes from rationalizing storage. What do you see as the value rationale for DSPM? And let me start with Teza in that question.
Absolutely. I think, one of the key, given where regulation is moving from a SEC standpoint, where CISOs are accountable for any kind of data incidents, breaches, things like that. it becomes extremely imperative for CISOs to understand, because you could shift the accountability to some other business unit, but at the end of the day, if there was a breach, it's the CISO who's responsible for the whole organization, irrespective of whether your data is at a third party, in-house, consumed by whom. And that is where having a clear insight into what's happening with your data, which starts with understanding what are your different places where you collect your data, where you store them. Does it make sense? For you to apply any kind of governance around data, you need to first, see where does this stay, so that you could tie it back to whether it's a HIPAA or a GDPR or some other regulation, and that is where DSPM plays an important role. This was solved in a more, I would say, a multi-step manner in the past. DSPM helps consolidate a lot of this into a single dashboard view. Now, that becomes important for us from an organization standpoint, where when we have to tie it back to saying, okay, we have to delete some data for a user requests some data to be deleted. Mm-hmm. How do we tie it back? It becomes extremely challenging going back to this LLM world, because you're now training your models on public data. Yep. So if I request some company to delete my data, for them to get a handle of what are those layers is an extremely challenging task. So DSPM brings the legal, from a retention standpoint, the privacy angle to it, enabling your business. So a lot of this convergence happens using something like this. So that is why DSPM was a huge priority for us, and it's still, it's a work in progress. You keep on feeding new stores, new data, hubs to it, but yeah, we are moving forward.
Let me double click on that. So initially, when you evaluated DSPM, there's probably, here's our business case. What have you found as some of the benefits beyond what you thought initially with that business case, or are there things beyond that initial business case?
I think one thing that really stuck out was we can now kind of like create a monetary value around different stores, and we have 1,700 to 2,000 of these stores sitting around. Now, how do you risk rank between these different stores, saying this store is millions of dollars worth versus some other store which is probably not at the same monetary value. So we could tie a lot of this, which helps me tie it back to my materiality from an SEC regulation standpoint, to my overall, my insurance, cyber insurance. So it helps you like expand that the monetary piece of it to other facets that you need to think of. So that was good for us.
Appreciate that. Renee, any thoughts?
So one of the things that I believe that the SEC rule did is that it didn't just focus on confidential data. We don't think of, now we're talking much more about resiliency. And to me, you need data. I mean, you probably, if you're an airline, you probably need access to the passenger data to actually be able to put people on a plane, right? So I think DSPM can also help you identify whether the data that you need to run your critical business systems is also, effectively protected, because you need it to be there, right? You need it to be resilient. So that's why for me it's not just sensitive, it's really critical, because again, as I said to you, it could be your box of socks that you need, yeah. but it's critical to a business process, so you need that thing, even if it is that, to be effectively protected. But I think that's one of the real benefits to me or a sea change also that I've seen, is that we have to think holistically about a system, right? A system that's sitting there, and if the code's working, great, but if it's working there without the data, well, it's probably not going to do very much for you.
Makes sense. Brad, your thoughts?
Yeah, risk mitigation was the primary catalyst for our DSPM project. And there's numerous risks in our risk register related to our data, whether it's legal and regulatory requirements, new Gen AI risk. There's several things in our risk register associated with data in general, and DSPM mitigates many of those risks. So it's one of those solutions that actually mitigates multiple problems or multiple issues in the risk register.
Yeah, I was at a meeting with 20 CISOs recently, and the consensus was it's all about the data.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to that data, it's like data writ large. It's not just cloud. It's on-prem.
Yeah,
all.
It's data, and yeah,
It's just SaaS,
but
third
the
party.
one that they
SaaS and third
third party.
Who's sharing with their fourth and fifth parties, probably. So it's.
For most of us, that is our crown jewels, is our data.
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, one of the things that DSPM can bring to light is a lot of previously unknown risk that might be there. You might find sensitive data in places unexpected, and that's going to result in a lot more tickets or action items for the SOC team, for your security operations team. Any comments on the impact there? Because you could look at this and go, oh, that's going to be a lot more work. It'll improve my risk profile, but it's going to be a lot more work. Any thoughts on or comments on having experience with it or viewpoint on it? What the implications are? And let me hand that one to Brad.
Yeah, well, those alerts are high fidelity because they're related to your crown jewels.
Okay, absolutely. So it's not noise here.
It's not noise from my perspective, and that's probably the stuff we should be on top of.
Okay. And has it allowed you also to sort of get better alignment with the business, with other constituents as you find this stuff and they go, I didn't have visibility to that also?
Yeah, that's correct. It gives them insights to the risks related to the business as well. Yeah.
I think that's one of the key requirements of a DSPM system is that it actually produces a usable set of findings, something that people can action, something that you could actually give to somebody in your business, and you're not just handing them a piece of gobbledygook that they can't figure out what do you want me to do with this, right? Again, very early on, many years ago, it was definitely a few years ago, we looked into a solution before DSPM was even a Gartner term, right? They had to have invented it because who else would invent this? So we looked into it, and the problem and the reason why we couldn't actually implement the solution that we were testing is because the data that we were actually getting from the system wasn't usable.
Mm-hmm.
And we gave, we all looked at it and we said, we don't know what to do with it. And there was no clicking, and there was just nothing that you could put a user in front of and basically ask them for help. So that's actually for me a big requirement is when you do get the alert or whatever you want to call it, that you be able to have the context, and be able to give somebody an ability to action it, because I don't think all the actions are going to be taken by the security team. You'll probably want to give that to somebody else and then talk to them about what will be the next step here.
And you probably don't want to automate it because you could bring business to a halt if you make the wrong decision there.
You might end up with a rule that says if it hasn't been used for 2 years, maybe we'll do something besides keep it. But for the most part, no, you don't. You don't automate it.
Teza, any comments there?
Yeah, I think resonate very closely with the other comments. I would say the visibility becomes very important. The context helps us execute better. And then the third piece is for our SOC teams to be better, the earlier they have the information, the more proactive they are, because that reduces the overall burnout on the team, because now if you don't have that visibility, now you're almost like triaging an incident or an issue in the dark for a long time, but having this enables you to see immediately, does this impact, where is this impact, because this goes back to the 72-hour rule that we have around incident investigations, reporting on that from SEC. So it contributes to a lot of those parameters as well as an organization.
I consider it actually a pre-incident mitigation, tool, because at the end of the day, if you do have, confidential data or sensitive data, and it's exposed. I mean, how many people have ever had an S3 bucket, exposed? And everybody, right? So at least this way, that's a nice alert to get, because that means you can fix it before, it lands, in the news.
Has there been any sort of low-hanging fruit that it has allowed you to mitigate? Because one of the things I hear about is, okay, there's frequently sort of stale access to data, and that comes to light. And that actually surprised me, because that's sort of identity land rather than what I would think DSPM would do. But any thoughts on some of the value you've seen in the deployment, or you see in the marketplace when you talk to your CISO peers?
Yeah, going back to the S3 bucket point, which is probably the most common thing that every CISO deals with. But then, when you first run a scan like this, you probably see a lot of DSP, a lot of S3 stores. But now you have to go and remediate. And some of these buckets or some of these data stores are designed to be accessed publicly. So you need to almost differentiate, saying, okay, this has to be accessed publicly given the nature of my business, and some should not. So it also helps you clearly differentiate or tier them out, saying, okay, let's have this publicly exposed, but we also know what data is in there, versus something else which should be privately be kept. So it helps you with some of those remediation strategies in an effective manner.
Yeah, that's the big difference between DSPM and CSPM. Is a CSPM tool will typically tell you, okay, you've configured this as open to the world, but it doesn't have any context in what's in that S3 bucket. DSPM actually goes in and sees what data is in the bucket, which is important. And we talked about a little bit earlier about alert fatigue. You don't want to have to go and look at every S3 bucket that's open to the world. You only want to look at the ones that have sensitive data in it that you don't want exposed.
Makes sense. Renee, any thoughts?
Again, DSPM just provides so much value because what I talked about, even the trend towards SaaS and cloud, and it not being managed by IT, then there is a good chance that the identity won't be in your identity platform. So I would say that there's probably a good chance that, again, there's access, outside of the identity platform. And more importantly, I think that you would find that there's access, and if your policy is that you need two-factor, I'll bet you find that there's data that doesn't even have two-factor implemented. So it's not surprising, again, that this I don't want to call it unmanaged, because business probably thinks they're doing a fine job managing it. That's why I hesitate to throw rocks at it. But it definitely, it's not a surprise that there are identities, that are no longer active within the company being used to access data.
Yep. So when you look at DSPM and you've seen the cycle of deployment, do you have any advice for your CISO peers on how to get the most value and have the most effective deployment of DSPM? Were there any things you did or constituents you consulted with to get the most value out of your DSPM deployment? Let me have Brad take a shot at that.
I'd start up by saying, make sure you're ready to remediate the issues that are inevitably going to be found. Because I think that's the big surprise when folks first connect to DSPM and they get a volume, or they identify a volume of issues that they may not have really planned on dealing with. But once you have that visibility, you're probably going to want to address those issues. So you should plan, when you go into it, you should plan on dedicating some resources to fixing the issues that you find.
And is that the CISO talking to their IT peers on the line of business peers, saying, hey, we're doing this and we might find stuff, let's all be prepared to go about remediating this stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have before you start.
Yes, it's not security in isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teza?
Absolutely, it has to be a collaborative conversation with different partners, because one is your cloud stores that you have, but your third parties are a big piece of how to make your DSPM more effective. So you cannot chew the whole thing off. So it's a roadmap that you start off with your big hitters, which are probably some of your cloud, Azure or AWS or things like that, and then you slowly start expanding to these other, because your infra teams won't know about some marketing tool that's being used to do some personalization of website for a customer. They won't even know about that, right?
Right.
So you have to step in and keep going. So it's be ready for chewing one off, then going after the other. So, but it's one of the greatest payoffs you would see as a CISO from a risk management standpoint. I strongly believe that.
Yeah. We were very clear when we did our evaluation what the outcomes were that we expected to achieve. One was obviously the storage, which meant that the IT infrastructure team was widely interested in our access, so they were a clear stakeholder. But when we said that we would be able to discover orphan data, abandoned data, data that wasn't properly protected, data that was well past its retention schedule, we had total support from the legal department, from the retention, from the privacy attorney, and we didn't even start the evaluation until we knew that whatever we were going to find, that we were all on board, that we all agreed that this was a risk that was worthy of understanding better, and we all sort of had a role when the results came out to play, so that it wasn't just going to be a report that was sitting on a shelf and nobody was doing anything about it. And there was no surprise. Like a lot of partners didn't say, "What do you mean you ran a tool and you found all this stuff and you didn't tell me you were doing it?" So there was just CISO should not surprise stakeholders.
So was there did the line of business buy in? Was there a win for them, or they were just, from a corporate standpoint, they bought into the fact that we need to protect this data?
Everybody bought in, and the tools were not ready. The tools were not ready, and the hardest thing that I've ever had to do is give back money. As a CISO, because there was just no tool that we could agree that would work. And this was years ago, before the term DSPM actually became a term.
So we've had a tour de force in data security posture management. We've covered a lot of material. Any final thoughts, closing thoughts, any of the thoughts that you haven't expressed that you want to bring out, or lessons you want to share? And let me start, Brad.
Yeah, I would say get started. At the very least, it's fairly easy to connect to DSPM to your infrastructure and get that visibility. So if you're not sure if it's going to bring you value, you can usually find that out without making a commitment to purchase it. So just get started. At least know what your risk is.
Teza?
Yeah, I strongly believe data is kind of that function that brings everybody together. Just like CISOs kind of moved into the CIO kind of part, they're moving more into the CDO world, right? So, and something like DSPM is an important critical piece that can help you leap forward. It looks like a massive thing, but you have to just get started, and the visibility itself amazes you. So yeah.
And it's an ongoing thing. It's not a one and done. It shows value over time.
Absolutely.
I do training for the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, and they have a 100-page document on cyber risk, and they have a list of questions that they, that you can ask the CISO. Ask them this question: where's your data? Do you know where our data is? How well is it protected? I wouldn't even begin to know how to answer that question unless I had a solution like DSPM in my pocket to help me. Otherwise, I'd be like, I don't know. Do you know? I don't know that the board wants that answer.
That makes sense. So that's all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists and thank that's Renee and Teza and Brad, and also thank everybody who's watching. So be sure to check out the rest of the sessions at brighttalk.com. Thank you, and have a fantastic day.